distinguished guests, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the Presidium to this IASA lecture, and a particularly warm welcome I would like to extend to Rector of the University of Salzburg, Bernhard Fügenschuh, Vice Rector Elias Felten, and Vice Rector for Research of the University of Vienna, Manuela Baccarini. We are very honored that you are here this evening. I would also like to warmly welcome distinguished ambassadors and representatives of foreign embassies present in this room. And of course, I would like to extend a special welcome to the representatives and organizers of IASA this evening, John Schellenhuber, Director of IASA, Christian Köberl, Chair of the Austrian IASA Council and member of the Austrian Academy of Sciences, who will also guide us through this evening as a moderator. And of course, the speaker of this evening, Dimitrios Simos. We are gathered here in the so-called Theatersaal. It's one of the buildings of, or rather, a room in one of the buildings of the Academy in this part of the first district, where the Academy has been located since 1857. The Academy itself was founded a little bit earlier in 1847, initially only as a learned society, bringing together the most brilliant minds of the time. However, today the Academy of Sciences is different. It rests, as we always say, on three pillars. It's not just the learned society. It is also Austria's largest non-university research organization with 26 institutes spanning a broad range of fields from archaeology and the humanities to quantum research and space science. And it is also a funding organization, and it is an organization that seeks to enter into a dialogue with the society and to have lectures, to have a variety of formats in which we engage with the broader public. And all these functions are important for the Academy and for its broader mission to foster science in every respect. And it is international partnerships, such as the one with IASA, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, that are so important for us to fulfill that mission. The Austrian Academy of Sciences has served for more than 50 years as Austria's national member organization in IASA and is very proud to serve in that function. The Academy represents the Austrian scientific community on the IASA Council and acts as an important link between the scientific community, policymakers, universities, research institutions, the wider public. And this close cooperation gave rise also to the ÖAW IASA lecture series, which was launched in 2012. The first lecture took place on the 25th of October 2012 during the conference marking IASA's 40th anniversary. And since then, the series has regularly brought distinguished scientists to Vienna to present new research and reflect on broader implications, with a strong emphasis on addressing topics of particular relevance to society. And it is very much in this tradition that tonight our distinguished speaker is going to address a topic that couldn't be more timely, unfortunately, I have to say. How resilient are the infrastructures on which our societies depend in an increasingly hybrid world? I guess that everybody in this room could immediately mention 1, 2, 3, 4 examples where we already experienced very recently how vulnerable our infrastructures, our societies are. One incident that immediately comes to my mind was in April 2025 when a disturbance occurred in the high voltage transmission network in Catalonia in northeastern Spain. I remember we had a very important meeting and suddenly all our Spanish colleagues went dark, so to say. It took days to restore everything. We realized what happens if there is no electricity, if we have a major power outage. I also remember incidents with cybersecurity when suddenly like 8.5 million computers go down and because they crash because of an attack on computer systems. So this may be incidents where we already get a taste of what could happen if something even larger in scale were to occur, thinking about hospitals, thinking about airports, banks, and media organizations, the water supply, everything. So it's really timely to think about our resilience in increasingly interconnected systems. How well prepared are we when things go wrong? How much disruption can our systems absorb? When does a disturbance reveal a real systemic weakness? When is it just a stress test for which we should be grateful? What can we learn from such incidents? And it's to reflect on these questions. We have a speaker that couldn't be more suitable, actually. We're very proud to have Dimitrios Simos here. He's professor of cybersecurity at the University of Salzburg and a leading expert on combinatorial design, software testing, and complex secure systems. In his research, he develops mathematical approaches that help us better understand the behavior and resilience of complex digital infrastructures. But it's not really my task to introduce the speaker, and it's not just me welcoming you. Before we ask Professor Simos to the stage and deliver his speech, I would like to invite JASA Director John Schellhuber to offer a few welcoming remarks as well. It's probably not necessary to introduce John Schellhuber to you. He is the 12th Director General of JASA, the founding director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, which he led for over 2 decades. He has also held leading roles in international climate research and continues to shape that field through his work on the transformation of the built environment and the climate potential of regenerative architectures. I have now been given a long list of distinctions of John Schellhuber and memberships of academies worldwide in which he is a member. I hesitate to start reading it because it would take the next 20 minutes. So if you could just believe me that it is truly, truly impressive. And so let me just ask you to the stage. Thank you very much, and we're pleased to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much, President Wennerhorst. I blushed when you talked about this. You were too kind, actually, but this person is in the limelight today, not me, of course. So I feel privileged to say a few words, actually, of introduction. But first of all, thank you so much, Academy of Sciences, to host this event and actually to have started this series together with JASA. This is, I think, a fantastic partnership. I think we are a very good match. So the most distinguished body of scholars assembled in Austria, together with an institute which is truly international. We had President van der Bellen today at JASA for 2 hours. It was an extremely pleasant and deep event, and I think he was very impressed because he also met with the staff of YASA later, and we boast 80 countries or something like that. It's a dynamical system, of course, but it is very impressive. Just a few words on your theme, of course. I very much look forward to your lecture. So I've worked for 50 years in complex nonlinear systems, coming from quantum theory, but applying it to the climate system, for example, but also to other systems, human brain, for example, and so on. And you know that the very term resilience was more or less born at YASA, actually, a long, long time ago, applying, of course, to ecosystems and so on, but it has become a fundamental keyword in the debate of stability of systems, recovery of systems. Can you heal systems? Can they heal themselves, so to speak? And maybe just two applications where I'm involved. So quite a long time ago, I introduced this notion of tipping points in the Earth system into the debate. So it is about parts of the planetary system that can change the very character, actually, or could even be destroyed completely if you slowly change a critical parameter, and then there is a phase transition, which could mean that the system collapses completely. And this has become a big field of science, of course. The other thing which is much more closer to your field is critical infrastructure. So we applied nonlinear dynamics analysis to big grids, electric grids, for example in Scandinavia, but also in Central Europe, and tried to find the strange attractors in the basin of attraction governing them. And we found, for example, that, for the Scandinavian grid, you really have to deal with the dead ends, so to speak, dangling bonds almost. And if you understand them, then you can increase the stability of the system. So it's very practical. We even tried to sell our idea to Siemens, but we were too stupid to understand that this is really relevant. Maybe we will come to regret it anyway. So we are very much looking forward to your lecture. And I also understand you are the first member of the YASA, so to speak, Friends of YASA group, who is now giving a lecture. So this is another reason why we extremely welcome your commitment, and I'm tremendously looking forward to your lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have -2 minutes, so I'll be quick. My name is Christian Kobel. I'm the chair of the Austrian YASA committee, and my job today is being a moderator for the discussion afterwards and to briefly introduce our speaker. Dimitrios Simos is full professor at the University of Salzburg, senior lecturer at the Salzburg University of Applied Sciences, and he holds a joint professorship there in cybersecurity, so really topical. He also has guest researcher appointments at the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology, and also at the Graz University of Technology. Has authored or co-authored over 150 publications on these topics. And without further ado, this is a really exciting topic that affects all of us. And my own research has something to do with things that fall from the sky or affect us, like solar storms and so on, which can be highly influential, since you also mentioned natural hazards. So I'll be looking forward to that. And please, 35 minutes for your presentation. Afterwards, a few questions up here, and then the more influential, important questions downstairs over drinks. Thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. All right. Welcome, everyone. So first of all, I would like to thank the Academy of Sciences for the very nice invitation. It's quite an honor and a privilege to be here. The President of the Austrian IASA Council and also Victor Bruckmann for the overall invitation organization that allows me to offer some insights in this very complex topic of cyber resilience. Many thanks also to the IASA Director and also to the President of the Academy of Humanities and Social Sciences Divisions for their kind words. I would also like to thank my colleagues, especially Director Fugensu, the Vice Director Felten, also members from my department that traveled all the way from Salzburg to Vienna for being present here today. I would also like to thank some of my past colleagues because for a long time I have been in Vienna, familiar faces that came here today, friends and family, which is quite important for me to be here. But most important, thanks to all of the Viennese public that honored us with your presence here today. All right, so let's begin. So why resilience? Why systems basically are prone to faults? Due to their size, due to their complexity, due to the human factor. Because systems nowadays have evolved in such a length that as long as you have the human factor involved and also the complexity of the systems, it's quite, these systems have a quite emergent and, as we say, unpredictable behavior. Which, for us, trying to make the systems to be resilient against natural hazards and cyber attacks is also quite critical with respect to the critical infrastructure, and this will be the theme, the main theme of the, let's say, the lecture today. All right, first I want to start with when we speak about security or cybersecurity in general, there is, let's say, quite some misconceptions and around the different notions, and I would like to distill a bit what really happens in reality. So first, when we talk about security, we have IT security, or as it was known, computer security, where it's meant to protect IT systems from damages and threats. And by damage, I don't mean we take the laptop and we throw it to the ground. I mean digital damage, or basically when the internals of the IT system, like the laptops or the devices, can be essentially manipulated. Then we have the field of cybersecurity, which is also the theme of today, which is a bit wider than IT security. And here we're concerned to protect cyber-physical systems. And for this, we mean now digital systems that have, for example, also a physical component, like IoT devices or IoT sensors. And also here, our interest is to protect this kind of infrastructure, again, from damages and threats. Last, we have the field of information security, because IT security is only one aspect of information security. And in reality, information security started back in the ancient times, because it involves also non-technical systems. For example, paper-based information was the beginning of cryptography back in the old eras. But one of the most significant challenges that we have in security when we design systems, or we want especially to protect the systems, that the systems are as secure as their weakest link. And why is that is a topic we will try to explore together in the next 30 minutes. So first, I want to start with some simple examples for cyber attacks, and I will gradually build around very complex attacks in the critical infrastructure. And here I have a so-called phishing example, which is a type of cyber attack. And this phishing cyber attack took place actually here in Austria in March 2023. The screen, basically the figures you have here are basically actual snapshots from the Erste Bank IT Security Center and how this attack works. So the attackers basically are sending you like a fake email, which many of us have in our mail accounts, have received such emails. And the attacker here pretends basically that he's an actual user from Erste Bank and tries to fool you to click on a link that is in that email. So basically this is what we call phishing. And if you somehow fall victim to this, then you're getting redirected to websites that look very close to the real ones. And if we go one step further, actually you type your username and your password, then we have a data theft, because all of these credentials are now basically the property of the attackers. I want to show also another attack, a so-called malware example, and this took place worldwide back in 2017. It's called the WannaCry ransomware attack, and this software, when penetrates the defenses of our IT systems, it is installed on your devices. What it actually does, it locks down completely the overall infrastructure, which means you can no longer log in into your system. And the attackers ask a ransom of you. This is what's called a ransomware attack. Now, this attack, which is still present until today from many different groups, it's quite devastating, and most of the times it is targeting primarily healthcare providers and IT infrastructure, based on that these systems cannot remain for a long time unavailable to the users. So how secure are our systems and software today? So this is just an excerpt of some recent news on cybersecurity, which took place the last months, or basically last weeks. And we see also, like, over the course of time, how basically cybersecurity or cybersecurity attacks evolve from simple, let's say, phishing attacks to attacks on the critical infrastructure. We heard before, but also I want to highlight, for example, a cyber attack that took place in September in the Heathrow airport, and had as a result more than 70,000 flights to be grounded for a couple of days. This was basically an attack on the internal systems, and due to the nature of Heathrow being basically one of the major hubs in Europe, it was basically caused severe damages to the overall aviation. Also recently, we see attacks, even for example in AI, or basically the so-called LLMs, where cybersecurity researchers have manipulated the prompts, injecting basically fake prompts, and the result is manipulation of data, and what you get as an output is no longer something you can trust. Even from a stakeholder point of view, for example, Austria's Interior Ministry has admitted that at least 100 email accounts have been breached with quite sensitive information. We also heard before, but I also want to highlight again, that back in summer, in terms of blackouts, cyber attack was one of the main reasons suspected behind the blackouts that took place in Portugal and Spain, and caused nationwide and outages across the country. And actually blackouts, and especially how the overall attacks happen on the electric grid or the power grid, is a topic we will explore extensively today. Nonetheless, even in the world of science and technology, major universities, for example, like the University of Sapienza in Rome, fall victim very recently to a cyber attack. More than 80,000 student accounts have been locked. And even our own TU Wien was also, unfortunately, recently victim of such an attack. So, what can we do about this? We have attacks, and from our job is basically from the scientific side and also from the academia side, we try now to offer methods to protect the systems. And one of the ways to defend is also from our side to attack, but we attack in a, let's say, in a good purpose. We're trying to identify what kind of vulnerabilities are present in the systems, and in that way try to inform the software developers or the stakeholders to fix these vulnerabilities. Here I have an expert of such vulnerabilities. For example, the Herbal vulnerability was present in OpenSSL software, and OpenSSL is the protocol that is being used for secure communications in the internet. The impact was quite severe because it had affected millions of websites and servers. We also have the Spectre vulnerability that is present on the CPU architectures, actually. And the impact, even until today, is that an attacker can read the operating system memory, which means they can read passwords, they can read financial data, and currently we have only software solutions, because a complete defense against such an attack means to redesign entirely our architecture on a hardware level. Last, we have the Stuxnet attack, which is a virus that has been spread through the network a long time ago. And it was targeting, the impact was on industrial controllers, and the threat was to shut down completely the critical infrastructure. And for Stuxnet, actually, we will speak also a bit later in detail. Now, such vulnerabilities or such attacks have quite severe consequences. For example, even in a dated back report in 2017, like software failures or also cyber attacks, caused no less of around 2 trillion damages in financial losses. And from our side, what we have in our availability to defend against this, like the human personnel or, let's say, the scientists working in this field. Just in Austria, around 65% of the companies declare that they have lack of IT specialists. And one of the main fields that we seek knowledge and also to train students and researchers is cybersecurity together with software engineering. And if we view this topic even more worldwide, we're missing around 4 million cybersecurity specialists to be able to cope up with this increased game of attack and defense, as we say, in this field. So now I want to show, basically, going a bit more towards, let's say, real life, how we do things. I want to have an easy example on how we can perform testing in real life. And here I have an industrial control panel, where we suppose we have now a system with on and off switches. So how do we test such a system? So this system has 34 switches. Every one of these switches can be set either on or off, which means if I would like to test exhaustively and to guarantee, let's say, the resilience of this industrial board, that it doesn't have a malfunction, I will need to perform 2 to the power of 34 settings to exhaustively cover all of them, which is a couple of billion settings. So in reality, how actually I can do this in an effective manner. And here, very briefly, I will introduce a technical notion, some mathematical structures that we use in testing. And now, imagine the previous example, just shrink down only to 3 switches. I have some objects that come from mathematics that we call covering arrays. And again, the setup is similar. And here I have, for example, these 3 parameters, A, B, and C, means they can encode the first switch, the second switch, and the third switch. What do you see as rows are basically simply assignments on how I can basically set up the different switches. If I take, for example, the second row, which is 0 and 1 and 1, means the first switch is off, the second and the third are on. And I have this minimal, as we say, test set that comes from mathematical algorithms. But maybe the most important property is to examine what happens on the right, where we see that if you examine all possible pairwise, as we say, interactions of these parameters, at least every possible 2-valued combination appears at least once, which gives us some guarantees of coverage, in the sense that if there is a potential fault that depends on these parameters, we will be able most likely to uncover it. So how this knowledge is useful? Now, if we go back and we assume that there is the failures or let's say the vulnerabilities, they don't depend on the complexity of the overall board, but they only depend on, let's say, on a 3-way switch setup to interact together. Then from these mathematical objects, we get a test set only of 33 tests. Or if it's 4-way combinations, we only need 85 tests. And this is, let's say, our first line of defense, because somehow we managed to reduce this exponentiality of a complex system to something we can handle very efficiently. Now, such methods have further evolved in a field that we call combinatorial security testing, and over the years we provided defenses by testing systems, complex systems like web applications or protocols or autonomous systems to uncover vulnerabilities. Nonetheless, this is a lecture about critical infrastructure. And after now this first, let's say, walkthrough over the software part, because software is present in different nodes of the critical infrastructure, let's go a bit deeper. So what do we mean with critical infrastructure? We have different sectors. We have the energy sector, we have financial sector, healthcare, telecommunications, and water systems. So energy might be the sector that powers, and most important sector in the sense it powers nearly every other industry, from homes and businesses to critical public services. Simply put, a disruption of the energy supply can impact everything in our society. The financial sector ensures businesses, governments, and individuals to carry their transactions and also to manage investments. It underpins entirely our economic activity. The healthcare sector, healthcare facilities and systems provide medical devices, emergency care, and also public health monitoring, which means any attack here can threaten not only the safety of systems, but also patient safety. Telecommunications, this sector keeps the world connected, especially in our society, that everything is basically interconnected, supporting everything from internet services to emergency communication systems. And here, secure communication is quite vital for coordinating response during disruptions or emergencies. Finally, access to clean water is fundamental for public health and hygiene. It is also a quite important sector for us to safeguard. Now, what are some common cyber threats to critical infrastructure? We still have, unfortunately, ransomware attacks, which remain a severe threat, where attackers usually encrypt an organization's data and demand payment for its release. As I said earlier, this is very common against healthcare and IT providers. We have distributed so-called denial of service attacks, where these attacks can flood the system with excessive traffic, overwhelm servers, and make services unavailable for the legitimate users. Imagine, for example, that all of us here, we constantly try to reach the same web page when we're just, let's say, 100 personnel. How this flooding works from the attackers, imagine like millions or billions of requests are targeted through a specific domain. And like this, they can set it unavailable. We have insider threats, because not all threats come from the outside an organization. Employees that have access to sensitive systems might accidentally introduce malware or misuse their access credentials. We have phishing attacks, where cyber criminals often use phishing emails, as was shown earlier. This is also why I saw this example, and social engineering tactics to deceive employees into providing their access credentials. Unfortunately, in the last years, a new threat has emerged, the so-called advanced persistent threats, APTs. And APTs involve long-term targeted attacks where cyber criminals infiltrate a network and remain undetected for extended period of time. And most of these hacker groups are basically state-sponsored. And this is quite the case, not only scientifically, but also in real life, where governments employ hacker groups to attack, one group to attack the critical infrastructure of another. We have data breaches that involve unauthorized access, theft, or exposure of sensitive information. And last, and maybe most important for today, we have the so-called supply chain attacks, where many organizations rely on third-party vendors for hardware, software, or services. And in that case, when cyber criminals target supply chains, they're trying, as we say, to hit in a single point of failure. So, how these supply chain attacks work? And especially from an attacking point of view, the attackers are always interested to target, as we say, single point of failures. So here I have a so-called supply chain, where, simply put, in simple terms, is a process comprising of resources and process beginning at the raw materials, goes to manufacturing plants until it ends up in the consumer level. For example, I have an oil refinery that produces oil, that goes through a pump station, there's transportation to reach the society, the industry. I also have some gas pipelines. And here, in this complex system, I have 4 different nodes that are being attacked individually, 2 from a physical attack and 2 from a cyber attack. For example, a physical attack can simply be an act of sabotage, simply to blow off one of their compression stations. A cyber attack could be to infiltrate simply a control system here on the pipeline, and by this gain access to the overall architecture of the network. Even worse, or maybe even more simple from an attacking point of view, to infiltrate the business systems of the gas distribution company, to target the accounts of senior officials, and by getting administrative privileges in that regard, can access again the entire infrastructure. Another very important sector of critical infrastructure, as we have seen, is telecommunications, which relies quite heavily nowadays on satellites. And I want to pose a question: how do we actually know that the images you receive from the satellites are true, especially what you see now globally? Scientifically speaking, hacking satellites is like hacking cars, specifically autonomous cars. We have shown in the past that by manipulation of protocols within a car, the famous CAN protocol, which is a communication system that allows devices and microcontrollers to exchange data reliably without the need of a central host controller, is the same protocol that is actually being used in satellites. Someone had a very diligent idea to simply take the same protocol that is being used in autonomous driving and carve it in the satellites. And recently, some other colleagues deployed an attack, which in effect not only manipulates the satellite data, but also can cause a complete data theft of the ownership. Now I want to go a bit on even more deeper in the critical infrastructure. And I want to lay down the key phases in as much possible non-technical matter of the first documented, at least publicly, knowledge we have of a cyber attack that took place against the Ukrainian power grid in 2015. The effect was quite devastating. The duration was 6 hours, more than 200,000 households were affected, and caused power outages, what we know very simply as blackouts. Now, the cyber attack evolved in the following manner. There were different phases. APTs, basically these state-sponsored hacker groups, used 6 different adversarial techniques for months by harvesting public information on senior personnel of the power providers. Also, basically, in many countries, the first step to see who owns, basically, an energy company is public knowledge. And what they did is they tried to target specifically on all the levels of the C-level management who is actually responsible for what. Now, as soon as this was identified, the next phase was to perform a so-called spear phishing attack, where simply what the attackers did is they started sending emails with having as attachments Word documents with malware, basically with the so-called Black Energy 3 malicious software. Now, the officials that actually opened these attachments or basically accessed these emails, this resulted into the theft of credentials from the attackers, simply because network scanning and keylogging here was not sufficient defenses. And from a technical point of view, this was only the only mechanism of defense was this username password verification. So the overall power grid infrastructure, for example, didn't use two-factor authentication, and this enabled the attackers to gain access in the overall command control systems, and through a distribution management system, initiate a remote shutdown. And also, such attacks, basically, which is a mix of cyber attacks and also social engineering, let's say, tactics, could happen to any country in the world. Now I want to show another cause of blackout, where going a little bit to the world to another threat from so-called natural hazards, where wildfires caused blackouts back in Venezuela in 2019. The duration was 7 days and resulted in 30-day power rationing. It was the longest power outage in the country and affected here the entire population. And see the difference between some days, basically, and here the consequences were quite severe. The telecommunication infrastructure was down. There were no payments, no access to ATMs. There was not enough fuel for the emergency generators. There were medical supply issues. Hospitals, for example, could not operate. And all of this happened of what we say a single point of failure. Back at the time, 70 to 80% of the national power supply came from only one hydroelectric power plant. What happened in reality is that the wildfire overheated power lines. Some of the lines shut down, and as a compensation from the grid, turbines increased their speed, which caused an overload of the systems, and this was the final, let's say, strike to destabilize the entire power grid. Now, staying a bit to the world of natural hazards, which is also quite like a big threat, not only to the critical infrastructure, but to the society in general. Here I have an expert of different disasters that took place. This is from a study from Copernicus, together with other agencies. And it's quite evident that natural hazards are a threat for climate, for economy, but also here, most important, also for the human life. Besides the damages that are quite financially astonishing, around 20 billion euro, around 335 of our fellow citizens, unfortunately, here lost their life. So what can we do about this? Over the years, as a means of defense, we work on analysis, modeling, and simulation of so-called complex systems. And in this video shows a comparison of two simulations which depict a real-life historical bushfire disaster that took place in Victoria in Australia in 2009, and we have conducted jointly with the federal government of Australia, specifically its research agency, CSIRO. So on the left, what you see is a simulation of the actual fire based on the historical data from governmental reports. What you see on the right is the development of the fire based on a manipulation of the input data. So basically what we did is we said how this fire will have evolved if only the wind speed was 1 kilometer more intensive. Or we can still plot or simulate different angles of the fire based on the angle of the air. So why I'm showing this? So the results of this simulation shows the potential for aiding disaster management by providing new means to analyze not only disasters, but also how to prevent new, especially when we're interested to design response plan strategies. Mathematically speaking, and also with a combination of many, many other sciences, what we are able to do here is basically to simulate all possible directions of how a potential fire can evolve a natural hazard before it becomes a disaster. And then we always know in which direction it will go, and for example, by this, we can, in advance, have evacuation strategies or put in place, for example, the fire brigades. Now let's try to combine a couple of things. So we have seen that natural hazards are a threat for critical infrastructure, and here I have yet another example of the Fukushima disaster, which was basically an earthquake and a tsunami caused a nuclear meltdown. So here I have a natural hazard that triggers a technological accident. At the same time, I have cyber attacks as a threat for critical infrastructure. And here I have in detail the steps of the Stuxnet attack, where the attempt was to infiltrate industrial drone systems from the Simos software, and the attack started simply by a flash drive. And the flash drive was loaded with the malware. The moment it accessed PC, it started propagating through the network until it reached essentially the servers back then of the Iranian infrastructure, specifically for enrichment of plutonium. Now, can someone imagine if both of these threats can combine in a so-called hybrid threat? From our side, we're studying quite intensively lately, and so it's not only a topic of scientific relevance, but I think a topic of overall resilience. What will happen if I have a combination of a physical and a cyber attack on the power grid? Here on the left, I have a picture that for many of you is familiar. This is the map of Austria. What you see with red dots is basically the locations of the Austrian power grid that powers the country. In addition here, I have an extended attack surface. For example, imagine you have natural hazards, especially in Austria, which is striking from lightning strikes or floods, that can influence the availability or disrupt the operation of nodes in the power grid. From simulations that we have conducted, even if a very few subset of these nodes are becoming unavailable, for example, due to a thunderstorm or basically to a flood, this can give the potential to an attacker to launch a cyber attack against its timing sensors, especially to the so-called digital monitoring systems, and this can trigger a response actions because the monitoring system is no longer in compliance with the actual cyber physical system. And this has caused quite a discrepancy and can lead to a blackout. So let's answer our main question. Why critical infrastructure remains vulnerable? For a couple of reasons. The first one is because we have legacy control systems. Simply put, back in the era of industrial automation, there was no computer science. So the older protocols were designed without security in mind. We also have aging physical infrastructure, which makes it highly prone to natural disasters. We don't, for example, lay down pipelines for gas every month. The networks are quite interconnected, which makes it very easy to attack from an attacker because it's in disposal a huge attack surface, but for us it's making it very difficult to defend because we have to defend every possible node in the infrastructure. We have an extremely long lifespan of critical systems where they're either outdated or their software is not passed. For example, in the world of aviation, of the civil aviation, in order to imagine to update the software of the airplanes. How do you actually do it? You have to ground the entire civilian fleet and to update the software both in the airplanes and to the traffic control systems. And also what I have just shown now, you also start having now a combination of both physical and cyber attacks. Let's go to the positive side. So what is the role of cybersecurity in disaster management and resilience in general? As we connect to the physical world digitally, from my perspective, cybersecurity must be prioritized and integrated into every step of digitalization. We should strengthen the critical infrastructure by implementing resilient and backup systems. This is quite important in order to be able to keep hospitals and emergency services running through crisis. Quite important is to secure communication channels, to protect emergency communication networks from disruption. This is quite important in the topic of emergency broadcasting, and we have actually quite some technology here in Austria, where first responders and citizens should receive accurate information. Last, to build so-called cyber-resilient response teams. And I don't mean now the cybersecurity specialists, simply mean to train the emergency personnel as much as possible to recognize cyber threats, especially when such threats coincide with natural disasters. Overall in Europe, from example from the European Space Agency, this is a tremendous activity that takes place the last 3 years, which they're not only trying to build awareness, but they're trying to provide cyber resilience to space, for example, to defend their satellites against incoming attacks. Some practices, best practices, what we can do to safeguard critical infrastructure, because not everything is negative. There is also a lot of positive measures and techniques that come from science. One way will be to implement the so-called zero trust architecture, which is an effective strategy to protect the infrastructure, which assumes that no user or system is trustworthy. To enable secure remote access, for example, to protect the access points of the infrastructure, not only with a authentication method of a user and password login, to use virtual private networks, to use multi-factor authentication, and similar tools. Organizations should conduct regular vulnerability assessments to help identify their weaknesses before an attacker can exploit them. Asset management, which is quite important to know what kind of assets, what kind of devices, what kind of servers you have within your network, which is then quite important. If you don't know what is basically the device in your network, you will never know from where the attack originally came from. To have data encryption and secure backup, which means to protect sensitive data and with encryption, which means even in the case that data are theft, an attacker cannot simply decrypt it or read what was originally there. Last, so-called cybersecurity awareness training. And for example, you being present here today, it's already like an act of awareness because you have sensibility for the topic, you want to learn more. And if we put it in a larger picture, this simply means to have a cybersecurity strategy where the employees, for example, of an organization learn more about cybersecurity, and this is usually one of the best first line of defense. Now, in this regard, in Austria, the federal government invested more than 45 million euro in the Austrian universities to conduct measures to upgrade their defenses, to become cybersecurity aware. And our university has the privilege of leading exactly this stream, the cybersecurity awareness. In TU Graz is leading agreed upon practices. Univin is focusing quite a lot on penetration testing. Security operation centers to monitor essentially the traffic around all universities takes place from the Economic University of Vienna, while technical measures on the overall infrastructure are led from TU Wien. But maybe the biggest vulnerability sits right in front of your keyboard. So maybe the next time you are called to change your password, don't follow this policy, which is an actual expert. Please use a digital system. Thank you very much.